Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Rubius Hagrid is big, kind-hearted, fiercely loyal to his friends, and never raised any red flags. But the Harry Potter fandom knows how to dig deeper, even when everything seems obvious on the surface. In this video, I've gathered the most curious and unexpectedly deep theories about Hagrid. Get ready? Things are about to get interesting. Number 1. Voldemort was actually afraid of Hagrid. In the Chamber of Secrets, we learn that Tom Riddle and Hagrid were at Hogwarts at the same time. It was Riddle who framed Hagrid, accusing him of opening the chamber, a move that cost Hagrid his reputation and his chance to finish his magical education. At first glance, it seems like Riddle simply picked an easy scapegoat, but there's a theory that flips the whole narrative. What if young Voldemort saw Hagrid as a threat? After all, Hagrid wasn't just a wizard, he was a half-giant, and if he had completed his magical training, his strength could have been immense. Perhaps the Dark Lord decided to eliminate a rival before Hagrid could fully realize his magical potential. Number 2. Hagrid's wand was never really broken. After being expelled from Hogwarts, Hagrid was officially banned from performing magic. His wand was supposedly snapped, and he hid the pieces in a bright pink umbrella. But was the wand truly destroyed? There's a theory that thanks to Dumbledore, who by then wielded the Elder Wand, Hagrid's wand was secretly repaired. Its transformation into an umbrella may have been a clever disguise, allowing Hagrid to continue using it while staying under the Ministry's radar. Number 3. The door to Fluffy wasn't meant to be secure. One of the most debated moments in the Philosopher's Stone is how easy it was to get past the traps protecting the stone, starting with the door guarded by Fluffy, the three-headed dog. It opened with a simple spell. Some believe this was intentional. Dumbledore may have known that Hagrid wouldn't resist visiting Fluffy, and so he enchanted the door to be easily opened, perhaps suspecting that Hagrid wouldn't be able to perform more complex magic. A simple unlock spell ensured Hagrid could check in on his beloved creature. Number 4. Hagrid is the reason the lightning bolt scar became famous. Harry Potter's lightning bolt scar is one of the most iconic symbols of the series. But here's the question. How did the wizarding world even know about it? On the night of his parents' death, only 3 people saw Harry: Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Hagrid. This theory claims it was Hagrid, moved by the sight of the scar, who couldn't help but talk about it. Maybe he mentioned it in a pub, and from there, word spread like wildfire. Before long, everyone knew what the boy who lived looked like, thanks to a bit of Hagrid's loose talk. Number 5. Hagrid's mother might not have been a full-blooded giant. We know Hagrid's father was an ordinary wizard, and his mother was a giantess named Fridwulfa. But fans have long wondered how such a pairing could even happen, given the enormous difference in size. In the Order of the Phoenix, we meet Hagrid's brother Grawp, who stands at about 16 feet tall, shorter than the average giant, who can be up to 25 feet. It's possible that Fridwulfa wasn't a typical giantess, but rather a hybrid herself. Something between giant and human. That would make her union with Hagrid's father far more plausible. Number 6. Hagrid and Harry are the same age. Mentally, Hagrid often acts like a big kid. He believes in the good in everyone, gets upset easily, throws parties, and breaks the rules. This is usually chalked up to his giant heritage. But what if there's another explanation? Some fans suggest that giants mature more slowly than humans. That means Hagrid's mental and emotional age might have been on par with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. This would explain why he gets along so well with them. He's truly on their wavelength. Number 7. Hagrid, a double agent. The darkest and most controversial theory of them all. What if Hagrid was working for Voldemort from the very beginning? His kindness and clumsiness, just an act? According to this theory, the half-giant was secretly spying on the Order of the Phoenix and helping the enemy from within. Proof? Think about how easily he cast a spell on Dudley, how confidently he navigated a boat without a wand, how he kept dropping key pieces of information to Harry that accidentally led him into danger. It could all be part of an elaborate plan, or maybe not. Number 8. Hagrid secretly protected Harry, using magical creatures. Hagrid never went anywhere without a creature by his side, a dragon egg in a fire, a three-headed dog guarding a secret trapdoor, a herd of thestrals in the woods. Fans once thought it was just his obsession, but maybe it was more than love. Maybe it was strategy, a quiet shield, built not from spells, but from fangs, wings, and loyalty. When Harry faced the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, it was Fawkes who came, Dumbledore's phoenix, yes, but summoned with a loyalty Harry had earned. In Order of the Phoenix, it was Grawp, Hagrid's giant half-brother, who saved Hermione and Harry in the Forbidden Forest. And in Prisoner of Azkaban, Buckbeak swooped in and carried Harry and Sirius away, right from under the Ministry's nose. Each time it was a magical creature, and each time the creature knew who to protect. Maybe Hagrid had been preparing for war in his own way, quietly, patiently, with monsters instead of spells. "I brought you here, Harry," he once said. "Took you from the ruins, watched you grow." Maybe he always feared the day Voldemort would return. And maybe he surrounded Harry with creatures not for fun, but for battle, an army in plain sight, hidden in feathers, fur, and fangs. Number 9, Hagrid can cast magic without a wand. The storm was wild that night, waves crashed, wind howled, but the boat moved smooth as silk. Harry, just 11, sat wide-eyed. "How are we getting there?" he asked. Hagrid didn't answer. He tapped the side of the boat, no wand in sight. And suddenly, the boat turned on its own, steady and sure, cutting through the water like a blade. No spell spoken, no gesture made, just will, just magic. Officially, Hagrid's wand was broken when he was expelled. The pieces were hidden in his pink umbrella. But that umbrella was never seen during the boat ride. Nor when he soothed Buckbeak. Nor when he tamed a fire-breathing dragon. In the Sorcerer's Stone, he gives Dudley a pig's tail with a single jab. Again, no incantation, not even a flick, just magic, raw and direct. As if the power flowed through him naturally. Some fans believe Hagrid mastered wandless magic in secret. Perhaps Dumbledore taught him? Or maybe he learned it on his own, deep in the forest, far from prying eyes. Wandless magic is rare, difficult, even Voldemort rarely used it. But Hagrid, he made it look easy. Maybe that's why he kept it quiet, to stay under the Ministry's radar, to protect Dumbledore. Or maybe because true magic, the old kind, doesn't need a wand at all. Number 10, Hagrid is the descendant of a famous wizard. Hagrid never knew his mother well. She left when he was a boy. His father, kind but quiet, rarely spoke of her past. But there's a theory that Hagrid's bloodline hides more than just giant ancestry. Some fans believe he descends from one of the greatest magi zoologists of all time, Newt Scamander. It sounds unlikely at first. Newt was a brilliant scholar, a gentle soul, a man who wrote fantastic beasts and where to find them. But look closer. Newt vanished from the public eye later in life. He preferred the company of magical creatures to that of men. Sound familiar? Hagrid too lived apart, not in books or politics, but in the care of beasts. From dragons to unicorns, he understood them without words. His bond with creatures wasn't taught, it was instinct. In Chamber of Secrets, when the school feared Aragog, Hagrid said softly, "He wouldn't hurt a fly." He meant it. Not because he trained the spider, but because the spider trusted him. The way Buckbeak did, the way Fang did. These were more than pets, they were family. That kind of connection feels inherited. If Hagrid truly carried the blood of Scamander, it would explain so much. His natural empathy. his resistance to fear, his role not just as a caretaker, but as a bridge between the magical and the misunderstood. Maybe Dumbledore saw it all along. Maybe that's why he gave Hagrid the keys, the forest and the future, not just to protect creatures, but to carry on a legacy centuries deep. Number 11, Hagrid. Always knew Harry had to die. Hagrid stood in the clearing, cradling Harry's lifeless body in his arms. His face was twisted with grief. He didn't speak, he didn't cry, he just held him, as if he had known this moment would come, as if he had been preparing for it all along. In Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort orders Hagrid to carry the dead Harry back to Hogwarts, his silence says more than words. There is something ancient in his pain, something familiar. Some believe Hagrid knew the prophecy, knew Harry would have to die. Dumbledore trusted Hagrid more than anyone. He gave him keys, secrets, and missions no one else could handle. Why not the prophecy too? Hagrid might have known from the very start what would be asked of the boy he loved like a son. And that secret, quiet, heavy, lived in his heart for years. In Philosopher's Stone, he tells Harry, "Some say he died. Codswallop, in my opinion. Dunno if he had enough human left in him to die. Perhaps he wasn't just guessing. Perhaps he already knew how it would end. That would explain so much. The way Hagrid hovered around Harry, the way he always looked at him with a kind of sadness behind the smile, the way he told him, again and again, how proud his parents would be. Not just because he believed in Harry, but because he was preparing him for sacrifice, for destiny. And still he never said a word, never warned him, never begged him to run. Number 12, Hagrid will become headmaster of Hogwarts in the future. Years passed. The war ended. Peace returned to Hogwarts. Students filled the halls again. Laughter echoed across the moving staircases. And in his familiar hut at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid stayed, teaching, guiding, protecting. He never asked for more, but some say the castle chose him in the end. When Professor McGonagall grew older, she knew she had to pass the torch. Many expected a scholar, a strict academic, but she looked beyond the obvious. Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." And Hagrid had always made the right choice: kindness, loyalty, courage. So she made hers. She left the school in hands that had held dragons, carried wounded children, and never once dropped the truth. Some protested he never finished school. He wasn't refined. But the students didn't care. They lined the corridors, cheering when he first walked in as headmaster. His eyes brimmed with tears. He wore a massive black robe sewn just for the occasion. Behind him, Fang barked proudly. "I never thought," he whispered, "I never thought I'd be good enough." But he was. More than enough. Under Headmaster Hagrid, Hogwarts became warmer, wilder, kinder. No student was forgotten, no creature was unwelcome. He let young witches ride hippogriffs on the lawn and invited goblins to speak in the Great Hall. And in the portrait gallery beside Dumbledore and McGonagall hung a new face, bearded, smiling, with pink umbrella in hand. The boy who'd been expelled had become the guardian of them all. Number 13, Hagrid secretly controlled the forest and its inhabitants. The Forbidden Forest was wild, untamed, full of creatures that could tear a student apart in seconds: acromantulas, thestrals, werewolves, centaurs with arrows always drawn. And yet, nothing ever crossed the line. The trees kept their monsters, the monsters kept their silence, and Hogwarts stayed safe. Why? Some believe there was a silent guardian, a keeper of balance. That guardian was Hagrid. Think about Aragog, a giant spider, big as a car with hundreds of children. He could have overrun the school in one night, but he didn't, because he made a promise to Hagrid. "I never harmed a human," Aragog told Harry, "out of respect for Hagrid. Respect, Not fear, loyalty, not instinct, no spell, no leash, just trust. That kind of control doesn't come from magic, it comes from something deeper, a bond, a word that meant more in the forest than any curse. Centaurs were proud, fierce, they hated wizards, and yet they tolerated Hagrid, even let him bring students into the heart of the forest. During detention in Philosopher's Stone, Firenze saved Harry from Voldemort's shade, not for Harry's sake, but because the balance of the forest was threatened, a balance Hagrid helped preserve. When he returned from visiting Grawp in Order of the Phoenix, not a single beast had turned wild in his absence, because they waited for him, as if the forest itself paused until its master came back. Dumbledore knew. He didn't say it, but he knew. That's why Hagrid lived on the edge of the woods, not near the greenhouses, not by the lake, but right where the wild began. He wasn't just keeper of keys and grounds. He was the forest's voice, its heart, its watchman. And as long as Hagrid stood at the tree line, no creature crossed it without his silent permission. Number 14. Hagrid intentionally revealed Fluffy's secret to Quirrell. It started with a drink. Hagrid was at the leaky cauldron, enjoying a pint, when Professor Quirrell sat beside him, nervous, sweaty, smiling too much. The man in the ridiculous purple turban asked harmless questions about dragons, about Hogwarts, about strange creatures. Hagrid, always open, always friendly, answered without thinking. Then came the slip. "If you want to get past that dog," Hagrid said, "you just play him a bit of music." And that was it, the secret. How to get past Fluffy, the three-headed monster guarding the Philosopher's Stone. Quirrell blinked, smiled, said nothing. But he had what he came for. Most think it was a mistake, that Hagrid talked too much after a few drinks. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if Hagrid was meant to say it? Fans believe Dumbledore sent him, not to guard the secret, but to leak it, to lure Voldemort in, carefully, silently. Dumbledore knew Hagrid couldn't lie. He knew people believed him because he was so obvious, so real, that made him the perfect decoy. And it worked. Quirrell showed up later with a harp that played itself. Fluffy fell asleep, just like Hagrid had described. But Dumbledore was ready. Everything was in motion. The stone wasn't really in danger. It was part of a trap. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were just pieces on the board. Brave ones. Dumbledore made sure of that. Hagrid may have looked clumsy, kind, harmless, but don't be fooled. He's trusted with the keys to Hogwarts, with dragons, with the truth. So why not with a lie? A small one, told at the right time, to the right man, in the right pub, all to trick the Dark Lord himself. Number 15. Hagrid might be immortal. It begins with a curious glance, a whispered observation in the quiet corners of Hogwarts. Doesn't he look exactly the same? For decades, Rubeus Hagrid has stomped through the grounds of the castle with the same wild mane of hair, the same beetle-black eyes glinting with warmth, the same booming voice calling out to creatures and children alike. He has been the keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts longer than most students can remember. Longer, in fact, than most teachers can recall. And the strangest part, he hasn't changed, not one bit. That's where the whispers begin. That's where the theory takes root. The question is simple. Could Hagrid be immortal? Or at the very least, could he possess a lifespan so extended that he might outlive even the longest-living wizards? At first it sounds absurd, but dig deeper, as many fans have, and the idea becomes not only plausible, but eerily compelling. Rubeus Hagrid was born in 1928, the son of a wizard father and a giantess mother. By the time Harry Potter first sets foot in Hogwarts in 1991, Hagrid is already 63 years old. Yet the man who greets Harry on his 11th birthday looks no older than 50. Perhaps even younger, if you judge by magical standards. Nearly a decade later, during the Battle of Hogwarts, Hagrid is in his 70s, But he moves, fights, and even carries Harry's lifeless body through the battlefield with the strength and energy of a man in his prime. Bless him, he's got a heart as big as his fists, Professor McGonagall once remarked about Hagrid, though even she must have noticed his agelessness. Other professors, like Dumbledore, who was over 110 at the time of his death, showed physical signs of age. Dumbledore's long silver beard, his ever-thinning frame, and his tired eyes reflected the toll of time. Even magical beings have their limits, but Hagrid? His appearance remained constant from the 1940s to the 1990s, despite the trials he faced, including a stint in Azkaban and countless encounters with dangerous magical beasts. Let's go back further. Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts in 1943 when he was in his third year. Tom Riddle, later known as Lord Voldemort, framed him for opening the Chamber of Secrets. Yet even as a young teen, Hagrid was already massive, twice as tall as a normal man and 5 times as wide, as Harry described him. That size was not simply a result of overeating or lack of grooming, it was the mark of his half-giant blood. And that blood may be the key. Giants, as we know, are a dwindling race, living mostly in remote mountain ranges and often at odds with the wizarding world. They are immensely powerful, with skin tough enough to resist most spells and lifespans that, while not documented in detail, are believed to far exceed those of ordinary humans. In Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Newt Scamander notes that giants have ancient bloodlines and resist aging differently from humans. That's not just a throwaway line, but it may be the smoking wand in our investigation. Consider Madame Maxime, the headmistress of Beauxbatons Academy of Magic. She, too, is half-giant, though she insists otherwise. Yet, like Hagrid, she seems not to age significantly over time. When she appears at the Triwizard Tournament, she's described as elegant, commanding, and seemingly unaffected by the decades she's undoubtedly lived through. Could this be more than coincidence? Could it be that half-giants are naturally gifted, or cursed, with a resistance to time? If that's true, then Hagrid's life story becomes all the more remarkable. He has lived through 2 wizarding wars, both of which left their scars on the world. He carried the body of James and Lily Potter's child through flames. He watched Dumbledore fall. He stood against Death Eaters, and through it all he remained unchanged. Not even Azkaban, which drives most prisoners to madness and early graves, could wear him down. It was bad, all right, he admitted to Harry, but I held on. How many others could say the same? Then there's Buckbeak. When Hagrid took care of the proud hippogriff, he did so with tenderness and unwavering energy despite his age. He wept at Buckbeak's supposed execution as if it were the end of the world. That kind of emotional vulnerability is one of the few reminders that Hagrid is human, or at least partly so. But his physical condition, his resilience, that speaks of something ancient, something beyond the realm of ordinary humanity. Let's not forget Aragog. The monstrous acromantula raised by Hagrid in secret grew old and eventually died. When Hagrid found him dying in the Forbidden Forest, he mourned like a father. Yet the spider, born around the time Hagrid was a student, aged normally. Aragog's hairy legs became brittle, his eyesight faded, his venom dried up. But the man who raised him, already an adult by then, remained the same. It raises the uncomfortable question, how many friends will Hagrid watch wither away? When Harry, Ron, and Hermione visit Hagrid's hut, years after their school days, will he still be the same, serving rock cakes and tea in chipped mugs, his eyes twinkling behind his beard? Will he stand at the gate of Hogwarts for generations, watching students come and go like leaves in the wind? It's not hard to imagine. In fact, it's almost poetic. Hagrid, the eternal guardian. Hagrid, the immovable force of comfort and protection. There's also the way Dumbledore spoke of him. "I would trust Hagrid with my life," he once said, not just because of his loyalty, though Hagrid's loyalty is legendary, but perhaps because Dumbledore, ever the wise one, knew of something deeper. Perhaps he knew that Hagrid would always be there, that even long after his own death, the half-giant would still guard the grounds. Number 16, Hagrid, was the one who found Tom Riddle's diary. It had been raining when Hagrid returned to the ruins of the old castle wall, a part of the Hogwarts grounds he rarely visited. Years had passed since his expulsion. The scars of that time still lay buried in the shadows of his heart, especially the shame of being blamed for the opening of the Chamber of Secrets. He still remembered standing before Professor Dippet, frightened and confused, with Tom Riddle's icy words sealing his fate. "I had to act," Riddle had said, calm as ever. The school was no longer safe. Hagrid had pleaded, tried to explain that Aragog was harmless, that he'd never harm anyone. But the truth drowned in the smooth lies of the Slytherin boy with the perfect hair and perfect alibis. Years later, it was in those very ruins where Hagrid stumbled upon something he couldn't explain. While digging around to bury the remains of a thestral that had died in the forest, his spade clinked against something hard. Metal, perhaps? No. It was leather, dried and cracked, wrapped tightly in what looked like an old-school satchel, sealed with a faint, magical lock, long decayed by time. Curious, he brought it to his hut, dusted it off, and opened it. Inside lay a single object, a diary, blank, clean, too clean. Hagrid wasn't a reader, nor was he the suspicious type when it came to old things. He assumed it was just one of the hundreds of forgotten belongings left by students over the centuries. Perhaps it had belonged to a Ravenclaw girl. He always imagined them writing in diaries. He flipped through it, empty pages. Odd. He set it aside, planning to donate it to a charity box Filch often sent to Hogsmeade. But he never got around to it. Days passed, then weeks. The diary sat on a shelf, ignored. But what Hagrid didn't know, what no one could have known, was that the diary had a soul. It waited, it listened, it watched. Years later, after the first fall of Voldemort, a certain man paid a visit to Hogwarts. Lucius Malfoy. There, under the guise of inspecting the Board of Governors' influence on Dumbledore's policies, he walked the grounds, spoke softly with old staff, sipped tea with Dippet's successor, Armando Dillis. But that was not why he came. He was hunting. He had heard rumours of an object lost, something important to the Dark Lord, something hidden in the school grounds during Riddle's time. He believed it was still there, buried or locked away, and if anyone had stumbled upon it, it would have been the gamekeeper. That night, Malfoy visited Hagrid's hut. They spoke briefly. Malfoy mocked the hut's smell, made a few biting comments about the beast tamer, and noticed the diary forgotten on the shelf. His eyes narrowed. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, too quickly. Hagrid grunted. "Old thing. Found it near the ruins when I was burying a thestral. Thought it was junk." Malfoy picked it up, handling it like glass. He smiled. That smile never reached his eyes. He left with the diary, claiming he'd hand it over to the archives or some such nonsense. Hagrid didn't protest. He wasn't one to question authority, especially not someone like Malfoy, who always seemed to float above rules like a hawk above the forest. It didn't cross Hagrid's mind again, until Ginny Weasley's screams echoed through the castle years later. By the time Harry Potter discovered the truth about the diary, much had already happened. The basilisk had killed, the chamber had been reopened, and Ginny had almost died. When Harry thrust the basilisk fang through the diary, black ink hissed and bled like venom, and Tom Riddle's shade let out a scream that echoed in the very stone. But one question remained unanswered. How did Lucius Malfoy come into possession of the diary in the first place? In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore confronts Lucius after Harry saves Ginny. "I see," said Dumbledore, his eyes blazing. "Well, we shall all have to be very alert from now on, but I think, Lucius, you will find that it is not wise to go around planting dark objects into innocent children's school things." Lucius sneered but said nothing. He did not deny it. He simply turned and left, dragging his son with him. No one pressed further. No one asked where he had gotten the diary. But what if Hagrid's hands had once held the key to Voldemort's resurrection? The theory, whispered in corners of fan forums and magical speculation papers, suggests that Hagrid, without knowing it, had found the very first Horcrux, that he, the gentle half-giant who fed stray hippogriffs and brewed tea with rock cakes, had unknowingly helped the Dark Lord's fragment survive. There's a cruel irony in that. Riddle had destroyed Hagrid's life once, and through this diary, Hagrid, without malice or knowledge, helped Riddle return. The diary itself was always special. Dumbledore once said of it, "Very few people ever knew that Voldemort had made a Horcrux at all. It was his earliest, his first. The one he invested with his youthful ego, his charm, and his desire to live forever. A piece of soul placed inside an object that could think and speak and deceive. Why would such a diary be in the castle ruins? Tom Riddle, at the age of 16, had framed Hagrid and locked away the memory. But he also knew the diary was special. He wouldn't leave it to chance. Most likely, he hid it, somewhere near the entrance to the chamber, or in a place he knew no one would go. Perhaps he hid it in the ruins, knowing that even if he were expelled, he could retrieve it later. But when he left Hogwarts and never returned, the diary remained. It was fate, then, that led Hagrid to it. Number 17. Hagrid could communicate with all magical creatures. It wasn't just Hagrid's size that made him larger than life. Nor was it only his enormous heart hidden behind a wild beard and tangled hair. No, what truly set Rubeus Hagrid apart from other characters in the magical world was his uncanny connection to magical creatures. From the moment he first appeared, leading a flying motorcycle through the sky and placing baby Harry Potter on the Dursleys' doorstep, it was clear he wasn't an ordinary wizard. But few realized then that Hagrid might possess a gift as rare and as misunderstood as Parseltongue. Only instead of speaking to snakes, Hagrid seemed able to communicate with all magical creatures. When Hagrid first introduced Harry to the world of magic, he did so not through a grand wizarding duel or a spellbinding display, but with a trip to the leaky cauldron and a warm introduction to a snowy white owl named Hedwig. "You'll learn fast enough," he said, placing the owl's cage gently into Harry's hands. "There's no one like her, see?" His tone wasn't that of a man handing over a pet. It was reverent, as though he understood her far beyond feathers and flight. Hagrid didn't just admire magical creatures, he understood them on an instinctive, almost spiritual level. Consider Norbert, the Norwegian ridgeback dragon hatchling Hagrid illegally acquired in Harry Potter, and the Philosopher's Stone. Most would panic at the sight of a fire-breathing infant, but Hagrid cooed to the baby dragon as though it were a puppy. "He knows his mummy," Hagrid beamed, ignoring the blistering burns on his arm. Dragons were notoriously difficult, even for trained handlers, but Norbert calmed in Hagrid's presence. He responded to his voice, his touch, his emotions. It was more than bravery, it was resonance. Then there was Buckbeak, the proud hippogriff in Prisoner of Azkaban that bowed only to those who showed proper respect. But even before teaching the class how to approach a hippogriff, Hagrid had already formed a bond with the creature. "He's a very good hippogriff," Hagrid said, stroking Buckbeak's beak with surprising tenderness. "You've just got to approach him right." As Draco Malfoy learned the hard way, not everyone could manage it, but Hagrid never faltered. Buckbeak trusted him completely, enough to later allow Sirius Black to ride him to freedom. What truly sets Hagrid apart is that his connection wasn't just with creatures that had reputations for nobility or grace. He reached even the darkest corners of the magical bestiary. Acromantulas, for instance, giant spiders with a taste for human flesh. Aragog, the monstrous leader of the acromantulas in the Forbidden Forest, was raised by Hagrid from an egg. While the rest of the wizarding world saw Aragog as a deadly abomination, Hagrid saw a misunderstood friend. "Aragog never killed no one," Hagrid insisted. "Never." And perhaps he was right. Aragog respected Hagrid so much that he forbade his children from harming him, though they made no such promise about anyone else. "Hagrid has never sent men into our hollow before," Aragog told Harry and Ron. "Hagrid is my friend." There's something primal in the way Hagrid communicates with creatures. He doesn't rely on spells, incantations, or magical restraints. His language is one of empathy, tone, and presence. When Grawp, his half-brother giant, first appeared in Order of the Phoenix, he was volatile and wild. Even the centaurs of the forest refused to go near him, yet Hagrid called to him softly, "Grawpy, it's me, it's Haggar." And somehow the giant responded. He didn't lash out. He paused. There was recognition in his eyes. Hagrid once told Harry, "I think they can sense when ye mean them no harm." That may be true, but with Hagrid it felt like more than intent. It felt like language, a way of being, a magical frequency he vibrated on that others simply could not reach. It's almost as though he was born with a gift, a version of Parseltongue perhaps, but attuned to all magical life, not just serpents. Could it be that Hagrid, like Salazar Slytherin, bore a rare and ancient power, one that allowed him to connect to creatures across the magical spectrum? There's more. Consider Fluffy, the three-headed dog guarding the Philosopher's Stone. Hagrid acquired him from a Greek chappie in a pub and named him with typical affection. "Just play him a bit of music and he'll go straight off to sleep," Hagrid explained. That wasn't written in any textbook. That wasn't in the Hogwarts curriculum. It was knowledge born from connection, understanding, and some strange internal dialogue between man and beast. And when the Ministry sought to control magical creatures through regulation and bureaucracy, Hagrid stood in opposition, not through politics or protests, but through care. He taught students to look beyond fear. He challenged them to see the misunderstood in the menacing. "You've got to give 'em a chance," he'd say, whether speaking of blast-ended scroots or thestrals. He didn't just teach about magical creatures, he spoke for them. One of the most telling moments came in Goblet of Fire, when Hagrid introduced the class to thestrals, winged, skeletal horses visible only to those who had witnessed death. Most students were repulsed, even afraid, but Hagrid stroked their necks, whispered to them gently, and guided the class with patience. Luna Lovegood, who also saw them, later confirmed that the thestrals were not dangerous, just misunderstood. Hagrid had already known that. Even Firenze, the centaur, once said that humans lacked the instincts to understand magical beasts. "You are young and do not understand how foolish it is to ask centaurs to work with humans," he told Harry. But Hagrid wasn't like other humans. The centaurs of the forest, who despised wizards and witches alike, tolerated Hagrid's presence. They didn't trust him necessarily, but they didn't strike him down. That, in the world of centaurs, was a rare mercy. What if Hagrid's mother, Fridwulfa, a full-blooded giantess, passed down more than physical strength? What if Hagrid inherited an ancient ability of the giants, a forgotten language of the wild? Giants, after all, are creatures tied deeply to nature. Though they have long been cast aside by the wizarding world, they may carry remnants of primordial magic. Hagrid, as a half-giant, might have been the first in generations to walk in both worlds, the structured society of wizards and the untamed world of magical beasts. Number 18. Hagrid knew where a Horcrux was but stayed silent. It all started with a memory, a heavy locket, dull and cold, sitting in a dusty cabinet at 12 Grimmauld Place. Nobody thought much of it. Creature muttered about it, grumbled when someone moved it, hissed curses in half-sentences. But to most, it was just another one of the many cursed, dark, forgotten things littering the Black family home. And yet, there was one man who perhaps should have looked twice. One man who had seen more than most and who had a heart large enough to carry secrets like stones. Rubeus Hagrid. He had been in that house often enough. The Order of the Phoenix made it their sanctuary, and Hagrid, loyal as ever to Dumbledore, came and went with purpose. Sometimes he brought news, sometimes magical creatures for safekeeping, sometimes just a jug of fire whiskey and a longing for company. The ancient house didn't sit well with him. It whispered things, but he endured it because that's what Hagrid did. At some point during those visits he would have passed by that old cabinet. Maybe he opened it once out of curiosity. Maybe Creature snarled at him, protective and vicious, and he closed it again. But Hagrid was no fool. He'd taught care of magical creatures for years. He'd tamed monsters and dragons. He may have been half-giant, but his instincts were sharper than most, and the locket had a presence. He looked at me like it knew I was there, Mundungus Fletcher once muttered, referring to the same locket, moments before being hexed by an irate, Mad-Eye Moody. That wasn't normal. That wasn't a family heirloom. That was something else, something darker. Hagrid had spent years listening to Dumbledore, hearing whispers of Voldemort's dark deeds. He had been there the night baby Harry arrived at number 4, Privet Drive, wrapped in swaddling clothes, a lightning scar burning fresh on his forehead. He knew the war hadn't ended cleanly. He knew evil didn't die easy. And he knew Dumbledore had suspicions of objects, of secrets, of fragments of soul. Did Hagrid know exactly what a Horcrux was? Maybe not in detail. Dumbledore hadn't told him everything, but Hagrid was with Dumbledore more than most. He'd delivered Tom Riddle his Hogwarts letter after all. He'd seen the boy's charm, and he'd seen the shadow beneath it. A strange one he was even then, Hagrid had said. Liked to talk to snakes, he did, not natural. So when Hagrid saw that locket, when he felt the hum of something wrong, did he really not know, or did he choose not to see? There's a story half forgotten of a time Hagrid came to Grimmauld Place late at night. It was raining, and the fire had gone out. Creature was asleep, snoring somewhere below the kitchen. Sirius was brooding upstairs, and Hagrid, soaked and steaming, wandered through the hallway with a bottle of mead. He paused by the cabinet. The locket inside glinted in the candlelight. I could feel it, he would later mutter to Fang, like a heartbeat in my bones. He didn't open the cabinet that night. He didn't take the locket. But he remembered it. He carried it with him, like a weight. Because sometimes when you know too much, silence feels safer. Hagrid was brave, but not reckless. And he trusted Dumbledore with everything. That's where the theory deepens. Dumbledore might have suspected the locket long before Harry ever did. After all, he had visited the cave with Harry to retrieve it, only to find a fake. A note left behind by R.A.B., Regulus Arcturus Black. Dumbledore didn't speak of the locket at Grimmauld Place afterward, but he must have considered it. And if he had, perhaps he confided in Hagrid, quietly, off the record. Some things are better left to grow in the dark, Dumbledore had once said, cryptic as ever. Perhaps he meant secrets, Perhaps he meant Horcruxes. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione began their hunt, they started from scratch. They knew only what Dumbledore left behind, clues scattered like breadcrumbs. They didn't think to ask Hagrid, why would they? He had always been a source of comfort, not strategy. Yet maybe they should have. Maybe he knew more than he let on. Hagrid had also been a frequent guest at the Hog's Head, where Aberforth Dumbledore listened more than he spoke. Those who believe the theory argue that Aberforth may have hinted things to Hagrid, fed him ideas about the locket or other cursed objects. But Hagrid, ever loyal, never passed these on. He waited for Dumbledore to act. And when Dumbledore died, the burden fell to silence. Consider this. In Order of the Phoenix, when the trio visits Grimmauld Place, they see the cabinet. They try to throw the locket away. It resists. None of the trash would stay thrown away, the text reads. They kept finding it all over the place. That was no ordinary magic. And it's hard to believe Hagrid, a seasoned wizard with deep, magical intuition, wouldn't have noticed. But Hagrid's humility was both his strength and weakness. He never thought himself wise. He said as much. "I'm not as clever as you lot," he told Hermione once when she corrected his methods in class. But cleverness isn't the same as insight. And Hagrid had that in spades. There's another clue in Half-Blood Prince. When Dumbledore dies, Hagrid is devastated. He walks in a daze as if carrying not just grief but guilt. He burns the hut down, accidentally, a wand flick gone wrong. But his words are strange. He knew. He always knew. He mutters. What did Dumbledore know, or more precisely, what did Hagrid believe Dumbledore knew? It is entirely possible that the locket was one of many unspoken secrets between them. Dumbledore didn't always explain himself, but he trusted Hagrid with things no one else was entrusted with, Norbert the dragon, Aragog the acromantula, even carrying baby Harry through enemy skies. Would he not also entrust him with silence? The greatest support for this theory comes not from what Hagrid did, but what he didn't do. When Harry returned to Grimmauld Place in Deathly Hallows, he found it barren, ransacked. The locket was gone, taken by Mundungus Fletcher, and sold. But what if Hagrid had known its importance? What if he had suspected, and still he let it go? Maybe he hoped Dumbledore had a plan. Maybe he believed interfering would only bring harm. Or maybe, and this is the saddest version, Hagrid thought no one would believe him. He wasn't a scholar, he wasn't a seer, he was just Hagrid, but he knew the weight of evil, even when it came in the form of a pretty chain and Slytherin engraving. "I knew it were cursed," he might have said, had anyone asked. "Just didn't know how bad." That's the core of it. Not ignorance, but restraint, a quiet decision not to act, in trust or in fear. And who could blame him? The war was full of uncertainties. People held things back. Even Dumbledore didn't tell Harry everything until the very end. Some have pointed to the moment when Hagrid is captured by Death Eaters during the fall of Hogwarts. He never speaks of what they asked him. But perhaps the locket came up. Perhaps Voldemort feared someone like Hagrid might know too much. Perhaps it wasn't just coincidence that his hut was searched, his life threatened. There's a poetic symmetry in imagining Hagrid knew, that he bore that knowledge alone, beneath his shaggy beard and massive coat, that while Harry wandered the countryside with a snitch and a sword, Hagrid tended to creatures and carried the weight of a locket he once saw but never touched. And in the end, when Voldemort fell and silence lifted, Hagrid never spoke of it. He stood in the ruins, watching Harry with pride. Not for what Harry knew, but for what he believed, because in the end, perhaps that was all that mattered. "Great man Dumbledore," Hagrid had once said, voice thick with emotion. "Brilliant! Not always right, but brilliant." Perhaps Hagrid knew that brilliance required shadows. that some truths, like Horcruxes, were better whispered than shouted. And perhaps in his own way, Hagrid helped destroy Voldemort not by fighting, not by hunting, but by keeping one final secret buried until the world was ready to understand it. Not all heroes carry swords, some carry silence, and Hagrid, giant of a man, may have been one of them. Number 19. Hagrid's umbrella is an ancient artifact. Of all the objects in the wizarding world, few are as mysterious or as oddly charming as the battered pink umbrella carried by Rubeus Hagrid. While to muggles it might appear nothing more than a garish accessory for a rainy day, to those with knowledge of magic, the umbrella raises far more questions than it answers. Why, for instance, would Albus Dumbledore, a master of wand lore and one of the greatest wizards of the age, choose to conceal a wand inside such a mundane object? Was it merely an act of mercy toward Hagrid, who had been expelled from Hogwarts? Or is it possible that the umbrella itself is something far more ancient and powerful than anyone suspects? To understand this theory, we must return to a dark and sorrowful chapter in Hagrid's life. As a third-year student, he was accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets and expelled from Hogwarts. His wand was snapped, an irreversible punishment for most wizards. But Dumbledore, who had always believed in Hagrid's innocence, took the young boy under his wing, offering him a position as gamekeeper. More mysteriously, it appears he did something else, something that defied ministry regulations and magical law. He gave Hagrid his wand back, hidden within the shaft of a pink umbrella. When Harry first witnesses Hagrid performing magic in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the moment is subtle but telling. Hagrid taps the bricks behind the leaky cauldron, opening the gateway to Diagon Alley. 3 up, 2 across, he mutters, as he uses the umbrella as a wand. To Harry, it's wondrous. To an observant witch or wizard, it's shocking. How could a man whose wand had been officially destroyed perform such a clean and powerful spell? At first glance, the answer might seem simple. Dumbledore helped him reconstruct the wand illegally. But there are issues with this explanation. First, wand repair is an extremely advanced and unreliable process. Even when Harry uses the Elder Wand to repair his own broken wand, it's only possible because of the Elder Wand's unique mastery over other magical objects. In the Deathly Hallows, Hermione explicitly says, "Wands are not easily mended. Without the Elder Wand, the task should have been impossible, so how could Dumbledore have done it for Hagrid? Unless he had another artifact, a conduit perhaps, strong enough to channel the remains of Hagrid's wand and give it new life." That's where the theory of the umbrella as a magical artifact comes in. It is not the wand that grants Hagrid his limited magical ability, but the umbrella itself. This object, some suggest, was not crafted by modern wand-makers at all, but is a relic from a forgotten age. Possibly older than even Ollivander's line of wand-making, it may be a creation of one of the legendary artificers from the era of Merlin. Some even speculate that the artifact could be tied to Emeric the Evil, a dark wizard from the early Middle Ages. Emeric was said to possess a staff that was lost after his death. It's possible that Dumbledore, in his travels and studies, discovered the remains of this staff and reworked it into a form that would not draw attention, namely a pink umbrella. It's an absurd disguise and yet perfectly Hagrid. No one would suspect a powerful relic of being hidden in such an object. If this theory holds, it would explain Hagrid's ability to use certain spells despite his magical education being incomplete. In the Philosopher's Stone, he lights a fire in the middle of a cabin on a rocky island with a casual wave of the umbrella. Later, he uses it to repel Dudley with a pig's tail transformation. Though the spell backfires slightly, turning Dudley only partly into a pig, it demonstrates an astonishing level of magical control for someone officially untrained. As Hagrid himself says, I might not be a fully qualified wizard, but I've got my ways. One might question whether an artifact could really supplement a broken wand. But we know from other examples in the wizarding world that magical objects can store, amplify, and even replace a wizard's power. The Resurrection Stone, the Time Turner, and the Marauder's Map all exhibit enchantments that are independent of the user's skill level. The Deluminator, crafted by Dumbledore himself, responds not only to commands but to emotional cues. Magic can be woven into physical form, given intelligence, and preserved over centuries. It's also worth noting that Hagrid's umbrella shows no sign of strain or backlash, even though it channels broken magic. This suggests that it is either protecting Hagrid from magical rebound, or that it has a stabilizing core, a reservoir perhaps, that evens out the unstable spells cast through it. Such a feature would have to come from deep magical engineering, well beyond anything practiced in the modern age. Could Dumbledore have stumbled upon such an object? It's not as unlikely as it sounds. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore reveals to Harry that he has long travelled in pursuit of magical knowledge. I have visited the tombs of the oldest wizards, looked into forbidden scrolls, walked alone through the ruins of forgotten castles, he tells Harry. A man with such reach and curiosity would certainly have access to ancient relics, especially ones that others had long considered lost or too dangerous to use. Then there's the question of why Dumbledore would give such an object to Hagrid at all. The Ministry had condemned Hagrid, breaking his wand and branding him untrustworthy. By all rights, he should never have been allowed to perform magic again. But Dumbledore, ever the subtle rebel, may have found a loophole. If the Ministry tracked magical cores and wand ownership, a pink umbrella with no registered core might evade detection. And if it were in fact a self-sustaining artifact, it wouldn't need Ministry approval at all. More than that, it may have been Dumbledore's way of restoring dignity to Hagrid. He couldn't reverse the expulsion, he couldn't give him back his youth, but he could give him a piece of power, a tool, a weapon, a gift that said, "You are still a wizard, no matter what the Ministry says." Hagrid himself seems to treasure the umbrella with a mix of affection and protectiveness. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Lucius Malfoy insults Hagrid's competence, Hagrid quietly grips the umbrella more tightly. He never speaks of it openly, but it is always with him. Rain or shine, threat or peace, the umbrella is by his side. It is a part of him now, just as his ruined reputation is, just as his unwavering loyalty to Dumbledore is. Even the colour, pink, feels deliberate. Dumbledore was a man who valued misdirection. A garish pink umbrella is the last thing one would suspect to hold magic. It's also a gentle challenge to the assumptions of the wizarding world, that power must look a certain way, that wizards must behave a certain way, that strength cannot be wrapped in kindness. The pink umbrella, in all its absurdity, might be one of the most powerful, quiet protests Dumbledore ever made. Some readers may still argue that there's no need to imagine such complexity, that Dumbledore merely mended the wand and hid it in an umbrella. But J.K. Rowling's world is never so simple. Time and again, she layers her symbols. Objects matter, intentions matter, power flows from more than rules. It flows from stories, from belief, from bonds. And consider this, if the umbrella is not a powerful artifact, then Hagrid's magic becomes even more inexplicable. Why is he able to perform magic so cleanly, so confidently with a shattered wand core? Why does no Ministry agent ever confiscate it if they suspect he's casting illegally? Perhaps they don't know, perhaps even they are fooled by the umbrella's true nature. One of the most curious details lies in the Philosopher's Stone when Hagrid confronts the Dursleys. He grows angry, raises the umbrella, and it emits a powerful spell that gives Dudley a pig's tail. Magic like that should not be possible from a splintered wand, and yet it happens. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone at Hogwarts," he tells Harry afterward. "Strictly speaking, I'm not supposed to do magic. Not supposed to, not allowed to, but able to. The implication is that the umbrella enables Hagrid to circumvent his restriction, not because it contains his old wand, but because it surpasses it. If true, this theory redefines our understanding of Hagrid's strength. He is not merely a half-giant with a hidden wand, he is the keeper of a lost magic, entrusted with a relic that the Ministry would fear if they knew. In this light, Hagrid becomes something more than the lovable, clumsy figure he's often portrayed as. He becomes a guardian of forgotten magic, a vessel of compassion and rebellion, a living contradiction to the systems that cast him aside. The umbrella is his talisman and his secret. If the theory is true, it may be one of Dumbledore's quietest, most subversive victories. In a world where laws can crush people, he found a way to return magic to someone the law had broken. He hid it in plain sight. He placed it in the hands of a man who would never misuse it. And he wrapped it in pink. Number 20, Hagrid and his father were outcasts. Rubeus Hagrid was always different, towering over students and staff alike with tangled hair, a booming voice, and the faint scent of dragon feed clinging to his coat. He could never quite fade into the background. But beyond his unusual appearance and tender heart lay a story most people never dared to examine too closely. They knew bits and pieces, a mother who left, a father who raised him, a wand snapped, and a job offered by Dumbledore. Yet there was something deeper, something older, something that began before Hagrid ever stepped foot in Hogwarts. There's a theory whispered among certain corners of the fandom that Hagrid and his father were not simply isolated. They were outcasts, and not just socially but officially, exiled from the wizarding world because of blood, belief, and a forgotten rebellion. Hagrid always claimed that his mother, Fridwulfa, left when he was young, returning to the mountains where giants brawled and burned and buried each other beneath avalanches of stone. His father, a wizard of small stature and quiet demeanor, tried to raise him alone. It's easy to imagine the two of them, a boy who outgrew his father by age 6, living quietly on the edge of magical society. But was this quietness a choice or a punishment? Hagrid never spoke of grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins. No family came to visit him at school. No one claimed him when he was expelled. There's a silence around Hagrid's origins that speaks louder than words. We know that the wizarding world is harsh to those who don't fit neatly into its narrow categories. Werewolves like Remus Lupin are forced to hide. Squibs like Filch are pitied or mocked. Half-giants, though, are feared. "I am not a coward, but nor am I stupid. I know what people say about me," Hagrid once confessed in the Goblet of Fire. "They think I'm dangerous because of what I am." And yet he never tells the full story. Never says why his father, who was a pure-blood wizard, chose to marry a giantess. Something so far outside the realm of magical decorum that it borders on scandal. Why would he do it? Love, perhaps. But what if it was more than that? A century before Hagrid's time, there was a brief and violent uprising in the wizarding world. It's rarely spoken of, for its records were sealed by the Ministry. It was not led by dark wizards, but by idealists, those who believed that magical creatures were not just beasts to be controlled, but living beings with rights. Some names whispered in that rebellion were later purged from official documents, but one name survived in a damaged parchment recovered from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, Hadrianus Haggerston, a name not unlike Hagrid's and likely an ancestor. According to the theory, Hadrianus led a splinter group of wizards and witches who defied ministry orders to exterminate certain magical species deemed too dangerous. These included dragons, manticores, and even giants. The ministry's goal was control through fear. Hadrianus's goal was coexistence. His faction was defeated, and the punishment was exile, magical and social. Bloodlines tied to the rebellion were quietly watched, denied positions of influence, and their names slowly erased. If Hagrid's family was among them, it would explain everything. It would explain why Hagrid's father lived in isolation, why he never held a position at the ministry, why he raised his half-giant son in obscurity, avoiding wizarding communities, why he was never seen at public events. A man who once fought for the rights of magical beings, or descended from one who did, would have learned the price of open defiance. He would have taught his son to be gentle, kind, and loyal, because strength alone would never win respect. And then there is Dumbledore. Of all the professors at Hogwarts, he alone stood by Hagrid. When Hagrid was falsely accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets, it was Dumbledore who refused to banish him completely. "I do not believe Hagrid ever meant to hurt anyone," Dumbledore said, according to Tom Riddle's diary memory. "I will allow him to stay on as gamekeeper." But what if Dumbledore's kindness went beyond belief in innocence? What if he knew something more about Hagrid's lineage, about the betrayal of his family, about debts left unpaid? Dumbledore was a man of secrets. He once sought power for the greater good, and in his youth dabbled in dangerous ideas alongside Gellert Grindelwald. Later he came to see the flaws in such dreams, but perhaps he never forgot the rebels who fought for creature rights, the ones the ministry buried. Perhaps in Hagrid he saw a living connection to that ideal, and perhaps protecting Hagrid was a way of making amends for things even Dumbledore had once ignored. Hagrid's love for magical creatures has always been a defining trait, but it's also one that isolates him. Most witches and wizards view dragons, hippogriffs, and acromantulas with a mixture of horror and contempt. Hagrid sees beauty and dignity. "They're misunderstood, that's all," he tells Harry in The Philosopher's Stone when speaking of his pet dragon. Misunderstood, a word that describes not only the creatures but Hagrid himself. Take Aragog, for example, the monstrous acromantula that Hagrid raised from an egg and hid in the Forbidden Forest. Most people would have run in fear. Hagrid gave him shelter. Why? Not just because he loved creatures, but because he understood what it meant to be feared. "I never meant to endanger the students," he insisted. "Aragog wouldn't have hurt anyone, not if I told him not to." Hagrid believed that even the most terrifying beings could be reasoned with, because he believed in second chances. His hut on the edge of the forest, with its smoky hearth and bone-strewn yard, isn't just a home, it's a symbol. He lives on the margins, both literally and metaphorically, close enough to Hogwarts to be part of it, but never quite within its walls. He teaches care of magical creatures, a subject often mocked, rarely respected. Students see it as a joke, but for Hagrid it's a sacred calling, a way to pass on the truth his father perhaps once fought for, that every being deserves dignity. The ridicule Hagrid faces from others often comes in subtle forms. Lucius Malfoy sneers at his blood and lack of education. Dolores Umbridge calls him unfit. Even his peers sometimes underestimate him. And yet, when the final battle at Hogwarts begins, who is at the front lines? Hagrid. Not because he is brave in the traditional sense, but because he has always protected what others feared. There is one telling moment in the Order of the Phoenix when Hagrid returns from a secret mission to parley with the giants. It ends in disaster, but he tries anyway. Why? Not just because Dumbledore asked him, but because he still hoped that bridges could be built, that old wounds could be healed. He speaks to the giants in their own tongue, offers gifts, pleads for peace. But the ministry never forgave the giants for their past, and the giants never forgot their exile, just like Hagrid. When his half-brother Grawp is introduced, readers see the true extent of Hagrid's belief in redemption. Grawp is violent, confused, barely verbal. But Hagrid doesn't give up. "He's my brother," he says simply, as if that explains everything, as if love alone could overcome the scars of abandonment, isolation, and fear. Perhaps Hagrid believed it could. Perhaps that belief was passed down from a father who once dared to fight for the rights of those who could not speak for themselves. The Ministry's silence around Hagrid's origins is also telling. For all its surveillance, it never once stepped in to support him after his expulsion, never offered to investigate the Chamber of Secrets further, never inquired about his well-being. It was Dumbledore who had to step in. Perhaps the Ministry knew who Hagrid was. Perhaps they chose to look the other way, because punishing the son of a rebel, even a dead one, was easier than admitting their own injustice. Even Hagrid's wand, snapped in third year, speaks to this theory. Why destroy a young boy's ability to learn magic unless there was something more behind it? Why not let him keep it under supervision? The official reason was the danger he supposedly posed. The unofficial reason may have been simpler: vengeance, a final warning to those who still carried rebellious blood. When Hagrid appears in the Deathly Hallows carrying Harry's lifeless body from the Forbidden Forest, his roar of grief is not just for Harry. It is for everything he has lost: a mother who left, a father who died, a place he never fully belonged. And yet he never gave in to bitterness, never turned away. In that moment, with Hogwarts in flames and hope nearly gone, Hagrid is the embodiment of loyalty. He is the last line of defense between the fearful and the misunderstood. In the end, Hagrid's story is not one of tragedy, but of resilience. If this theory is true and his family was exiled for daring to believe in the value of magical creatures, then Hagrid lived his life in quiet defiance of that exile. He built a home from scraps, tamed monsters, and loved with all his heart. He never sought power or revenge, he sought belonging. And perhaps that is the greatest rebellion of all. Number 21, Hagrid, was secretly in love with McGonagall. It began perhaps with a look across the Great Hall. Long before Harry Potter ever set foot in Hogwarts, Rubeus Hagrid would sit silently at the staff table, his broad shoulders hunched forward, eyes lingering just a moment too long on the stern face of Minerva McGonagall. She was not the type to notice, always poised, precise, her mind wrapped around discipline and duty, but Hagrid saw more than just the Transfiguration Professor. He saw a woman of great inner fire, someone whose power came not only from her wand, but from her unshakable conviction. Many fans dismiss the idea of Hagrid harboring feelings for McGonagall as a fanciful theory, yet the clues are scattered throughout J.K. Rowling's work, like breadcrumbs for the careful reader. Consider how often Hagrid speaks of McGonagall, not just with respect, but with a quiet awe. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, when Dumbledore entrusts baby Harry to Hagrid, it is McGonagall who stands alongside them. Even in those earliest pages, their dynamic is clear. She questions Dumbledore's decisions while Hagrid defends them, always deferring to McGonagall with soft, uncertain deference. "She's a clever woman, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid once said to Harry, brushing some soot off his coat. "Knows what's what, she does." There was no need to add more. The weight in his voice suggested that to Hagrid, knowing what wasn't just about intelligence, it was a kind of magic in itself. We know Hagrid is no stranger to unspoken longing. His bashful demeanour around Madame Maxime during the Triwizard Tournament is a key moment in the series. When Harry observes Hagrid trying to impress her, his attempts are awkward, vulnerable. She's a lady, that one," he says, stammering. But what if Maxime reminded him of someone else, someone he had admired for years but never dared to approach? McGonagall, always dignified, never allowed personal emotions to cloud her judgment. But that doesn't mean she was unaware. A witch as perceptive as Minerva must have noticed Hagrid's loyalty, the way he was always quick to stand when she entered the room, how he hushed when she spoke, or how he watched her with something like hope. It was never mentioned outright, of course, not in a school like Hogwarts, where dignity often masked emotion. In the Order of the Phoenix, during Umbridge's reign of terror, Hagrid is openly distressed by the way McGonagall is treated. After she is attacked by Ministry auras and sent to St. Mungo's, Hagrid's reaction is immediate and visceral. "She's tougher than she looks," he mutters, eyes glittering. And yet those close to him note how subdued he becomes. It's not just anger, it's pain. The kind of pain a man feels when someone he deeply cares about has been hurt. We also cannot ignore the fact that Hagrid and McGonagall have a history that predates even Tom Riddle's rise. While Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts during his 3rd year, he remained at the school as gamekeeper and eventually Professor of Care of Magical Creatures. McGonagall, as a long-standing member of the staff, was among the few who continued to treat him with dignity. While others whispered about his past or his half-giant lineage, McGonagall never indulged such gossip. That in itself may have been enough to spark something in Hagrid's heart, a quiet, enduring gratitude that deepened into something more. One might also point to the way Hagrid referred to her in private conversations. He never called her just McGonagall. It was always Professor McGonagall, even when speaking casually. For someone like Hagrid, who often addressed others informally, calling Dumbledore simply Dumbledore or Harry from the beginning, this choice reveals something. That title was a boundary he would not cross, a symbol of respect tinged with reverence. Even in moments of crisis, McGonagall turned to Hagrid with a trust she rarely gave others. When the Battle of Hogwarts began, she sent him to rally the centaurs, knowing that only he could speak their language, command their respect. And when the battle ended and Hogwarts lay in shambles, Hagrid sought her out, not Dumbledore's portrait, not the other professors. He asked, "Is she all right?" before anything else. It's easy to imagine that over the years Hagrid's feelings became a quiet part of him, something he never voiced but always carried. Perhaps he told Fang about it, sitting outside his hut under the stars, sipping a mug of bitter tea. Perhaps he wondered what might have been different if he hadn't been expelled, if he'd been able to grow into the man he once dreamed he could become. Perhaps in those rare moments when McGonagall joined him for a walk through the grounds or a word by the fireplace in the staff room, his heart skipped a beat. McGonagall, for her part, was not a woman prone to romance. Her first love, Dougal McGregor, was a painful chapter that ended before it could truly begin. She chose duty over desire, Hogwarts over heartbreak. But does that mean she couldn't have seen Hagrid's affection, or even felt a glimmer of warmth in return? Perhaps not love, but understanding, kindness, even quiet companionship. One scene that stands out comes during Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore dies and the professors gather to decide the future of the school. Hagrid's grief is raw. "Dumbledore was the best man I ever knew," he sobs. McGonagall places a hand on his shoulder, gently, and says nothing. It's a rare moment of physical contact between them, one that speaks volumes. To comfort Hagrid with touch is to reach across the unspoken barrier between them. There's also the detail of how McGonagall defends Hagrid's place at Hogwarts time and again. When others question his role or suggest that he is unfit to teach, McGonagall stands firm. "Rubeus is more loyal than any staff member I've known," she once declared, "and more courageous. Coming from her, these are not empty words, they're declarations of character, and possibly of affection. Hagrid's feelings may have never been declared in words, but they were there, in his silences, in the way he looked at her when she wasn't looking, in the way he never called her by her first name. He was a man full of heart, yet bound by a sense of inadequacy. He always felt less than, especially among the refined wizards and witches of Hogwarts. How could he have thought himself worthy of someone like Minerva McGonagall? And yet, love is not always about equality in power or intellect. Sometimes it's about admiration, an unshakable belief in someone else's brilliance. Hagrid never once questioned McGonagall's decisions, never rolled his eyes or scoffed as Snape often did. He listened, respected, and when she asked, he answered. That kind of loyalty is rare, and it often grows from something deeper than professional obligation. The question remains, did McGonagall ever guess the depth of Hagrid's affection? Did she see it and choose not to speak of it, respecting his silence as much as he respected her distance? Or was she perhaps too focused on her responsibilities, too disciplined in heart and mind, to let such feelings rise to the surface? In the end, their story, if it can be called that, is one of almosts. Almost moments, almost words, almost touches. It is a love that never bloomed, not because it wasn't real, but because both parties had their reasons to let it rest in the background, like a faded painting hung in a quiet corridor. Hagrid may have carried that love until the end of his days, quietly, faithfully, without ever once expecting anything in return. And maybe, just maybe, McGonagall knew all along. Maybe she saw the way his eyes followed her, the way his voice softened when he said her name. Maybe she never said a word, because some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. Maybe in those final years, when they sat together by the fire after the students had gone to bed, sipping tea and talking about nothing in particular, they shared something that didn't need a name. It's a theory, yes, but not a wild one. It's woven from subtle threads, glimpses and gestures, pain and patience. A love that was never declared yet never denied. A love that lived quietly like so many loves do, not in grand gestures or sweeping confessions, but in everyday loyalty, in silent respect, and in the shadows of possibility. Number 22, Hagrid is the last of a magical line lost after the war. In the misty corners of the Forbidden Forest, where shadows slither between ancient trees and centaurs keep silent watch, there walks a man whose past is far murkier than most dare imagine. Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, half-giant, lover of beasts, is a character known for his gentle heart and fearsome frame. But some whisper that Hagrid's story stretches deeper than detentions and dragons. Some claim he is the last scion of a forgotten magical bloodline, a lineage that perished in the fire of the First Wizarding War, swallowed by the dark tide of Voldemort's fury. This theory, long hidden in corners of dusty libraries and muttered in underground wizarding circles, suggests that Hagrid is not just a humble half-giant, but a direct descendant of an ancient wizarding family with a unique affinity for magical creatures, a bloodline so secretive and rare that their name has been lost to time. Yet pieces of the puzzle remain, scattered like breadcrumbs in Hagrid's life, waiting to be followed. Let's begin with Hagrid's unique bond with magical beasts. From the moment we meet him in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid is associated with the wild and the misunderstood. He raises a baby dragon in his wooden hut. He introduces Harry to a monstrous three-headed dog named Fluffy. He carries a pink umbrella that, against all logic, performs real spells. These quirks, endearing though they may be, hint at a magical tradition different from the structured curriculum of Hogwarts. "I'm not supposed to do magic. Strictly speaking, I was expelled," Hagrid confides to Harry in their first journey together. His voice, tinged with a mix of regret and defiance, speaks volumes. Expelled he may have been, but Hagrid retained the core of his magical instinct. His affinity for creatures, dangerous, deadly or otherwise, isn't just a hobby. It feels inherited, ingrained, like a sacred trust passed down through blood. Consider this. Few wizards, even fully trained ones, could calm a hippogriff, yet Hagrid not only tames Buckbeak, but flies him to freedom. He raises a blast-ended Scroot without fear. He communicates with Thestrals and earns the respect of Aragog, a colossal acromantula who refers to Hagrid as his friend of the forest. None of these are feats an ordinary expelled student could achieve. The kind of magic Hagrid wields doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from something older. The theory posits that Hagrid's mother, Fridwulfa, a giantess, may not have been the sole magical influence in his bloodline. Rather, it suggests that his father descended from a now extinct family, once renowned for their sacred bond with magical beasts. This family, known in scattered historical fragments as the House of Grimglen, was said to reside near the Scottish Highlands centuries ago. Their symbol? A phoenix clutching an egg in its talons. Their legacy, forgotten, perhaps deliberately. What we do know is that such a house would have been a target during Voldemort's rise. The First Wizarding War was not just a battle for political power, it was a cleansing. Voldemort sought not only to destroy Muggleborns, but to eradicate those ancient houses that did not bend to his ideology. Families with unique abilities were a threat, and none more so than a line devoted to protecting magical beasts, many of whom Voldemort sought to exploit or destroy. During the 1970s, the name Grimglen disappears from all records. It is said that their ancestral home burned in a mysterious fire, their surviving members vanished. There are no confirmed Grimglens in the Ministry archives post-1974. However, in 1975, a young Rubeus Hagrid, already expelled from Hogwarts, is mysteriously retained on school grounds as groundskeeper, a move that even the Ministry questioned. Dumbledore's decision to protect Hagrid has often been attributed to kindness, but what if it was more than that? What if Dumbledore, with his vast knowledge of wizarding history, knew exactly who Hagrid was, not just an innocent boy wrongly expelled, but the last heir to a bloodline the world had lost? Albus Dumbledore was a man of secrets. He knew the truth about Harry's connection to Voldemort long before anyone else. He understood the Deathly Hallows, the prophecy, the Elder Wand. To believe he would keep Hagrid at Hogwarts purely out of sentimentality is to underestimate the headmaster's mind. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore even tells Harry, "I trust Hagrid with my life." That is not a phrase uttered lightly by a man like Dumbledore, but trust may not have been the only reason. Duty might have played a role. If Hagrid were truly the last of a forgotten line, Dumbledore may have seen it as his responsibility to protect that heritage. The pink umbrella Hagrid carries, widely speculated to hold the broken shards of his wand, might actually be a vessel for ancient magic, imbued with enchantments specific to the Grimglen bloodline. Some scholars have even suggested that the magic of the Grimglen family was wild in nature, not in the sense of uncontrolled but untamed, rooted in instinct rather than intellect. Hagrid's ability to sense when creatures are afraid, hungry, or in pain points to a form of magic that modern wizards have long since forgotten: the magic of empathy. Where modern magical study favours incantations and potions, Hagrid practices something primal and ancient. In the Goblet of Fire, when Harry is struggling with the Triwizard tasks, it is Hagrid who first teaches him about dragons. "They're seriously misunderstood creatures," Hagrid says with passion. It's more than a lesson, it's a philosophy, one that might trace back to the very creed of the Grimglen family. Defend the defenseless, understand the misunderstood, protect the magical, no matter how monstrous they seem. There is even speculation that the Grimglins maintained secret alliances with magical creatures, that some clans of centaurs and unicorn herds once recognized the crest of Grimglin and offered allegiance. That legacy may explain why the centaurs tolerated Hagrid's presence in the Forbidden Forest far more than they did most humans, even Firenze. Hagrid is never attacked, never chased. They recognize something in him, not fear, not threat, but kinship. The timeline supports the theory as well. Hagrid was born in 1928. The First Wizarding War began in the late 1960s, meaning that any family who stood against Voldemort would have had ample time to be targeted. If his father were the last of the Grimglins and his mother a giantess, then Hagrid's birth would have already been controversial. A union of magical and giant blood, both feared and shunned. That child would need protection. Dumbledore, having seen war before, would know what was coming. The pieces fall into place when you consider Hagrid's isolation. He has no relatives, no inheritance, no family name beyond his own. He lives in a hut on the edge of the forest, neither fully in Hogwarts nor outside it. This liminal status might be symbolic. Hagrid, the bridge between the magical world and the wild one. The last child of a house that existed between the structured wizarding society and the chaotic majesty of magical beasts. But like all powerful bloodlines, the Grimglin legacy may not rest easy. If Hagrid is indeed the last, then the magic of his ancestors lies dormant, unclaimed. Some have wondered if that dormant power was what led Voldemort to fear him, why he never tried to recruit Hagrid, even when the half-giant was vulnerable. Perhaps Voldemort knew that in Hagrid flowed a kind of magic that could not be corrupted, a magic older than curses. One curious clue lies in the Chamber of Secrets. When Tom Riddle frames Hagrid for opening the chamber, Dumbledore does not just question the truth, he defends Hagrid's nature. He says, "Rubeus Hagrid has my complete confidence." It's more than a defense, it's an oath, as if Dumbledore is protecting something sacred. And yet Hagrid never learns the full truth, or perhaps he does, but chooses not to dwell on it. In the Order of the Phoenix, he tells Harry, Ron, and Hermione, "There's things I can't tell you, not yet, Dumbledore's orders." What secrets were left untold when Dumbledore died? What was Hagrid never allowed to say? There is poetry in the idea that the last of an ancient house now walks with muddy boots and a moleskin coat, his home filled with fanged creatures and teacups the size of cauldrons. That he who once faced expulsion and exile might carry the soul of a forgotten legacy. A man of contradictions, feared and beloved, simple yet profound, half-giant yet wholly human. And perhaps, just perhaps, when the war ended and Voldemort fell, a different kind of victory was won. Not by wands or duels, but by endurance. Hagrid survived. He lived through 2 wars, bore loss and betrayal, faced dragons and death, and still found time for friendship. Maybe that is the truest magic of all. The quiet strength to protect what others would destroy. So the next time you picture Hagrid wandering the grounds of Hogwarts, lanterns swinging at his side, think not just of the friendly giant or the bumbling professor, think of the last Grimglin, the heir of beasts, the keeper of forgotten magic, and listen closely to the forest. You might just hear it whisper his name. Number 23, Hagrid, secretly cared for orphans after the war. They called him a half-giant, a gamekeeper, a man who bred dragons and loved monsters. But those who truly looked into Rubeus Hagrid's eyes saw something else. A silent, burning gentleness, a kindness too big for even his enormous frame. After Voldemort's first fall in 1981, when the wizarding world emerged blinking from the darkness, it was this man who quietly did something few others dared. He opened his heart, his hut, and perhaps even the forbidden forest to the war's smallest victims, the orphans. The fall of Voldemort was no clean victory. Yes, the Dark Lord had vanished, but he left behind a trail of broken homes, blood-stained ruins, and graves too small for the pain they carried. Scores of witches and wizards died fighting, others disappeared, and many more were left with children they could no longer protect. Among the debris of shattered lives, children wandered. Some were taken in by relatives, others ended up in care under the watchful eyes of the ministry. But there were whispers, faint, never confirmed, that not all these children ended up in official custody. Some disappeared into the edge of the woods, into a warm light flickering behind stained windows, into a hut that smelled of treacle toffee and damp earth. Some, they say, were taken in by Hagrid. The idea seems absurd at first. Hagrid, with his booming laugh and mishaps with magical creatures, hardly seemed like a caretaker of children, but those who knew him, truly knew him, would never doubt it. Hagrid's heart was his most dangerous weapon. He wept when Norbert the dragon left. He kept Aragog, a giant spider, safe and hidden from the world. He fought for Buckbeak's life like a father might for a son. Would it really be so far-fetched to imagine him cradling a frightened, parentless child in his arms? According to old Gryffindor students from the early 1980s, there were nights, particularly after the war, when strange noises would come from Hagrid's hut. Not the usual howling of a new beast, or a drunken shout after one too many tankards of mead. No, these were softer sounds, laughter, a lullaby off-key. A soft thump of footsteps that were too light to be his. One student, Elspeth Marlowe, remembers seeing a little girl with bright green eyes peeking from the hut window during breakfast hours. When she asked Hagrid who it was, he mumbled something about a cousin's niece visiting for the week and quickly changed the subject. Then there's the matter of the food. Hagrid always hunted and fished, kept a few pumpkins, and relied heavily on Hogwarts kitchens. But between 1981 and 1983, his food requests tripled. The elves mentioned it offhandedly to Professor Sprout one day. Hagrid's asking for 10 servings of stew? That's not even a dragon's appetite. Sprout had laughed it off. But the numbers were odd. Even Fang, his boarhound, couldn't explain away the extra loaves of bread and gallons of milk. There's more. A curious letter archived in the Ministry's Department of Magical Welfare, long since forgotten, bears the mark of an anonymous sender. Dated February 1982, it reads, "The children are safe with me. They've seen enough fear. Please don't come looking. Let them stay till the spring. I'll send them when it's warm enough. The initials are impossible to ignore." And yet the letter was dismissed as a prank or an unimportant oddity. No follow-up was made, no search initiated. Perhaps the most compelling rumour involves a boy named Callum Wick. Born in 1978, Callum's parents, both members of the Order of the Phoenix, were killed by Death Eaters in late 1981. Callum vanished, not a trace. His name was eventually added to the lost registry, assumed dead. But years later, in a small village in Wales, a young man matching his description appeared, adopted by a Muggle couple, with no memory of his early years, except one. He told a school nurse once, while under anaesthesia for a broken leg, "There was a big man with a beard who made me soup. He gave me a teddy with one eye and said I could keep it forever." The nurse, a squib who'd once worked at St. Mungo's, wrote it down. The memory had the unmistakable trace of magical trauma, followed by comfort. Could it be? Could Hagrid have taken in Callum and others like him? Children who slipped through the cracks of bureaucracy, or whom the ministry deemed too unstable for conventional care? Hagrid never spoke of it. But that's the thing about Hagrid. He never boasted, he never needed medals, he rarely even asked for help. His heart led him, not recognition. We know from canon that Hagrid was the one Dumbledore trusted with Harry on the night his parents were killed. It was Hagrid who rescued Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow. Hagrid's bringing him, Dumbledore says in Philosopher's Stone. I would trust Hagrid with my life. If Dumbledore trusted him with Harry, why not others? And consider what Professor McGonagall said that same night, shivering in her tartan cloak. Do you think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? Dumbledore replied without hesitation, I would trust Hagrid with my life. That unwavering trust didn't come out of nowhere. It was earned, possibly not just from years of loyalty, but also from quiet, unnoticed acts of kindness, the kind that happen off the record, away from the eyes of the ministry. There is a spot deep within the forbidden forest, past the centaurs, beyond the trees that whisper in ancient tongues, where the grass clears into a small glade. There a simple structure once stood. Not a house, not quite a cabin, more like a lean-to of patched canvas and charm-sealed wood, a place that could keep warmth in and danger out. In 1985, a group of centaurs burned it down after mistaking it for an encroachment. But one of them, Ferenzi, later told a student, that place sheltered innocence. We burned history, not harm. We cannot know how many children passed through that place. 1, 10, more, we can only guess. But every so often a former student will mention a strange child they saw wandering the edges of the lake or heard crying softly near Hagrid's hut, only to vanish the next day. Hagrid never denied these tales. He never confirmed them either. When asked once, during a particularly drunken evening in the Three Broomsticks, whether he'd ever thought of having children, Hagrid said, I had 'em, sort of. For a bit. Didn't last. But you love 'em all the same, don't you? And then he fell silent. Imagine it. A child, no older than 4, shivering in the aftermath of battle, held in the arms of a man with hands the size of dustbin lids, a man who had no children of his own, who lived on the edge of the school like an outcast, and who had known exile, pain and shame. Would he not recognize the same in them? Would he not do all he could to give them something safe, something soft? We see it in his relationship with Harry, the awkward gifts, the concern, the pride. I knew you were special, he told Harry once, knew it the moment I saw you. Perhaps he had said it before, perhaps not just to Harry. Years later, long after the Second Wizarding War, an unnamed man donated a substantial sum to St. Mungo's orphan recovery ward, specifying that it be used for those left behind by war. The letter was signed simply, for Rubius, who held my hand when I was too scared to breathe. No record of the man's identity remains. We live in a world where stories grow wilder with time, where myth and memory entwine like vines. But some vines, when traced carefully, lead to seeds of truth. So when you next see that old photograph of Hagrid standing awkwardly beside his hut, with Fang at his side and pumpkin vines curling around his boots, look a little closer. Perhaps you'll see the faintest silhouette of a child beside him. Perhaps they were there all along. Or perhaps the truth is hidden in a teacup at the bottom of a chipped mug in a hut at the edge of the forest, where love once lived in secret, too big to be seen, but not too big to be felt. Number 24. Hagrid knew the prophecy before Harry did. On a stormy night in 1991, a half-giant crashed through the door of a hut on a rock in the middle of the sea, bringing not just a birthday cake, but the truth about a boy's destiny. You're a wizard, Harry, Hagrid told him, forever changing the course of the boy's life. But what if that wasn't the beginning of the story? What if Hagrid had known all along who Harry was more than just the boy who lived, and had been guarding a much deeper secret? The prophecy, the one locked away in the Department of Mysteries, may have been whispered in his ear years before Harry ever laid eyes on Hogwarts. Rubeus Hagrid was not just keeper of keys and grounds, he was Dumbledore's man through and through, and Albus Dumbledore, the only wizard Voldemort ever feared, chose carefully those he let into his confidence. It's easy to forget that Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts not for academic failure, but for an incident involving a creature, an incident orchestrated by Tom Riddle himself. Dumbledore defended him then, kept him on, and for decades trusted Hagrid with tasks that seemed far beyond the duties of a groundskeeper. Why? Because Hagrid was loyal, and because Hagrid knew things. There's a moment in the Philosopher's Stone that, in retrospect, feels weightier than it first appears. When Harry asks Hagrid why Voldemort wanted to kill him, Hagrid stammers, "Some say he died. Codswallop, in my opinion. Dunno if he had enough human left in him to die." But then he adds something curious. "Some say he's still out there biding his time, but I don't believe it. Not really. Dumbledore'd know if he was coming back." The way he trails off, the uncertainty in his voice, it's not the ignorance of a man in the dark. It's the burden of someone who knows too much and can't say it. In Order of the Phoenix, we finally hear the full prophecy from Dumbledore himself. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. But this wasn't news to Dumbledore. He had heard it from Sybil Trelawney over a decade before, and had hidden it ever since. He knew that Voldemort would seek out the child, and he knew that child could be Harry. Hagrid was not present at that meeting, but when Dumbledore chose someone to retrieve baby Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow, he didn't send Minerva McGonagall or any of the skilled Aurors in the Order. He sent Hagrid. "I would trust Hagrid with my life," Dumbledore said, and he did, entrusting him not only with the care of Harry, but perhaps with the knowledge that the child in his arms was not just an orphaned boy, but the centerpiece of a prophecy that could destroy or save the world. Why else would Hagrid be so determined to protect Harry, to defend him at every turn, to appear out of nowhere the moment danger struck? Why else would he show such strange restraint whenever matters of fate or prophecy were mentioned? Let's look at the Chamber of Secrets. When Dobby warns Harry not to return to school, when students begin turning up petrified, when fear grips the castle, Hagrid doesn't panic. He doesn't protest too much, doesn't question the strange events. Instead, he calmly prepares for the worst. If anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do would be to follow the spiders. He gives just enough to guide Harry, but never too much. Almost as though he's been told not to interfere too directly, perhaps by Dumbledore himself. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, the presence of Sirius Black rattles the wizarding world. The man believed to have betrayed Lily, and James is on the loose. And what does Hagrid do? He tells Harry that he should be cautious, but also adds, "I don't think you've got anything to worry about from Black, Harry." How could he possibly know that? Only someone who was privy to the real events of that fateful Halloween night in 1981 could say such a thing with any certainty. Only someone who knew the prophecy's implications, that it was Voldemort's choice, not Black's treachery, that led to the Potters' deaths. In the Goblet of Fire, when Harry's name comes out of the cup, Hagrid is one of the few who doesn't question his motives. He immediately believes him, supports him, stands by him. Not because he's blindly loyal, but because he knows something deeper is at play. "You've got a right to a decent chance. You've done more than enough to earn that." He says it with the quiet weight of someone who understands that Harry's presence in the tournament is more than just an accident. It's another step along a path that was laid out years ago. There's also the moment in The Half-Blood Prince when Aragog dies. Hagrid is devastated, of course, but he doesn't lash out or crumble completely. He tells Slughorn and Harry, he was my friend, but he was just a beast in the end, wasn't he? The line might seem like a throwaway, but it echoes something much deeper. Hagrid has always had a complex relationship with fate and nature. He raises dangerous creatures. He believes in second chances, but he also seems to accept, in a way few others do, that some paths can't be changed, that some ends are inevitable, like prophecy. And then there's the forest, the Forbidden Forest, where so many secrets live and breathe. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry walks into the forest to face Voldemort, to lay down his life, it is Hagrid who is there, tied up and captured, forced to watch. Of all the people in the world, why was Hagrid the one chosen to be a witness? Because he was there at the beginning. He was there when Harry was left on the Dursleys' doorstep. And perhaps fate, or something greater, demanded that he be there at the end. Let's not forget that moment during the flight of the 7 Potters, when Hagrid carries Harry through the sky on Sirius's old motorbike, the two of them surrounded by Death Eaters and curses flying. Hagrid drives straight into danger, crashes through a pond, nearly dies. Why take that risk? Why put Harry in such a vulnerable position, unless he believed that the boy would survive, that he had to survive, that there was no other outcome? That prophecy, once heard, cannot be outrun. Dumbledore kept many secrets. He was a master manipulator, a chess player who moved people as pieces. But even he couldn't bear the burden alone. And if he had to share it with anyone, if he had to whisper the terrible truth about a prophecy, about a child born to die, he would whisper it to someone who would never betray it, someone who would carry it in silence, someone like Hagrid. It would also explain why Hagrid never pressed Harry for answers, why he never asked about the scar, about the dreams, about the pain. Others did, Hermione, Ron, even Snape in his own cruel way, but Hagrid never did. He would say, "Yeah, all right there, Harry," and leave it at that. He didn't need to know the details because he already knew the story. He'd known it for years. This theory is not about painting Hagrid as a mastermind. He wasn't Dumbledore. He didn't plot or scheme, but he felt things. He understood loyalty, love, fear. And perhaps he understood that some things, prophecies, destinies, the end of a war, are too big to fight. Perhaps that's why he raised creatures that others feared, why he saw beauty in danger, because he knew that Harry's life was tied to something dark and ancient, something he could not change. In the Deathly Hallows, when Harry returns from the dead and reveals himself in the courtyard, Hagrid cries, "Harry, you're alive! Oh, Harry!" And the emotion in his voice is raw, broken beyond relief. Because for a moment, maybe he thought the prophecy had won. Maybe he thought the boy he'd carried through fire and storm had reached his end. And when he realized that Harry had returned, that somehow fate had bent but not broken, he wept, not just for Harry, but for all the years he'd spent knowing this day would come. So the next time you read the books, look at Hagrid closely. Look at the silences, the moments he says too little, the way he watches Harry, not just with affection, but with awe, sorrow, and quiet fear. "He'll be famous, a legend," he says in the first book. But the way he says it, it doesn't sound proud. It sounds like a warning. Hagrid knew not everything, not the exact wording, but enough. Enough to carry the weight of silence. Enough to know that Harry's life was not his own. Enough to love him without ever asking for anything in return. And perhaps that more than anything else makes him one of the bravest characters in the entire saga, because he bore the truth not with power, but with compassion, because he saw fate coming and chose to walk beside it anyway. Number 25, Hagrid, was once on the brink of joining the dark side. Of all the characters in the Harry Potter universe, Few are as beloved and underestimated as Rubeus Hagrid. His immense frame, wild beard, and teary-eyed fondness for dangerous creatures often paint him as a gentle giant, a loyal friend, and a harmless eccentric. Yet behind that warm exterior lies a life marked by pain, humiliation, and profound loneliness. What few dare to consider is that Hagrid's heart, so full of light, once hovered dangerously close to the shadows. There exists a compelling theory that Lord Voldemort once tried to recruit Hagrid, and that Hagrid, wounded by rejection and injustice, stood on the edge of vengeance. It was not strength nor certainty, but sheer goodness that pulled him back. To understand how close Hagrid may have come to the dark path, one must revisit the humiliation he suffered at Hogwarts. At the tender age of 13, he was expelled for a crime he did not commit, the opening of the Chamber of Secrets, and the alleged release of a deadly monster. His wand was snapped, his education terminated, and he was branded dangerous. It is hard to imagine the shame and confusion he must have felt. "I was third year," he told Harry. "Everyone knew it was me, even though it wasn't." Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. In reality, the beast had been a basilisk controlled by Tom Riddle, Voldemort, in his student years. But Hagrid's innocence meant little in a society eager to cast out the odd and misunderstood. Even after Dumbledore intervened and allowed Hagrid to remain as gamekeeper, the damage was done. He was a half-giant in a world that feared giants. He was uneducated, ridiculed, and often spoken to as if he were simple-minded. One can only imagine how many times he overheard whispers of dangerous blood, monster lover, or shouldn't be allowed near the students. This bitterness, this aching for acceptance and dignity, was a wound Voldemort could have easily exploited. Tom Riddle, with his gift for manipulation, had already seen Hagrid's capacity for loyalty and his weakness for companionship. Recruiting Hagrid in his early years, while still a handsome, persuasive student, would have been a strategic move. We do not know precisely when Voldemort first tried to lure Hagrid, but the theory suggests it may have happened in the late 1940s, during the time when Tom Riddle was beginning to vanish into the shadows and explore the darkest corners of magic. He had already shown a cold charisma at Hogwarts, and he knew Hagrid's story intimately. After all, it was Riddle who framed him. What if, years later, Voldemort reappeared, not as an enemy, but as a savior offering vengeance? "They never understood you, Hagrid," he might have said. "They broke your wand and called you a criminal, but you could be powerful. You could teach them to fear your name." Voldemort had a pattern. He targeted the lonely, the alienated, the gifted yet rejected. Severus Snape, Barty Crouch Jr., even Draco Malfoy, all were drawn in through wounds that Voldemort promised to heal. Hagrid would have been no different. He was vulnerable, nursing a lifelong resentment, and desperate for a place in a world that rarely showed him kindness. The appeal of proving himself, of rising beyond what the Ministry saw in him, must have been tempting. For a man so deeply wronged, revenge might have felt like justice. But Hagrid had something that others lacked, an incorruptible heart. Though he could be brash, overly trusting and emotional, his sense of right and wrong was forged not from intellectual reasoning, but from instinctual compassion. It was this trait that led Dumbledore to trust him, not just as a groundskeeper, but as a carrier of secrets, as the protector of the Philosopher's Stone, and later as a member of the Order of the Phoenix. "I would trust Hagrid with my life," Dumbledore once said. That trust was not placed lightly. Still, there are hints that the darkness did appeal to him, if only briefly. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Rita Skeeter writes a slanderous article about his half-giant blood, Hagrid retreats into himself, almost disappears. It takes the encouragement of Madame Maxime and Dumbledore to restore his confidence. That's what makes this theory resonate. Hagrid was not untouchable. He was not immune to despair. And despair, as we have seen in the books, is the door through which evil walks. There is a telling moment in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Hagrid returns from his failed mission to negotiate with the giants. He speaks of the horrors he witnessed, the cruelty and the senseless violence. They don't trust no one, he says, and why should they? Been hunted for centuries they have. It is perhaps the closest we come to hearing Hagrid speak with something resembling bitterness. That sense of injustice, or being hunted for what one is, echoes Voldemort's own narrative. And yet Hagrid draws the opposite conclusion. Instead of hardening, he empathizes. Instead of fighting fire with fire, he returns to protect Hogwarts once more. It is also worth noting that Hagrid does not hate Tom Riddle. In fact, he almost never mentions him with anger. He seems to carry no personal grudge, despite the fact that Riddle ruined his life. This suggests not weakness, but remarkable moral strength. How many of us could watch our tormentor rise to global power, slaughter friends, and still not speak of them with hate? When Harry tells Hagrid in Half-Blood Prince that Voldemort was once a Hogwarts student, Hagrid replies only, "Yeah, well, he weren't right, even then." Simple words, no venom, no vengeance. Perhaps the most compelling argument for Hagrid's near fall to the dark side lies not in what he did, but what he could have done. With his strength, his knowledge of magical creatures, and his emotional loyalty, Hagrid could have been a formidable weapon in Voldemort's army. Imagine Hagrid leading giants into battle against the Ministry. Imagine him turning on Dumbledore, driven by decades of resentment. The wizarding world would not have been prepared for that. And Voldemort, clever as he was, must have known it. But Dumbledore got there first. He didn't just protect Hagrid from expulsion, he gave him purpose. He offered not pity, but trust. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are," Dumbledore once said. That quote applies perhaps most powerfully to Hagrid. Every day he made a choice to believe in the good, to forgive, to protect. Even when others saw a brute, he chose to live as a caretaker, a guide, a friend. In a way, Hagrid's life mirrors that of a tragic hero, except without the fall. His tragedy was quiet, a life cut short by injustice, potential buried under prejudice. Yet instead of becoming bitter, he became kind. Instead of striking back, he built a home for beasts, outcasts, and children in need of guidance. In doing so, he became something Voldemort never could, a man truly loved, and yes, there are still scars. Hagrid never became a full wizard. He could never do magic freely. He was never accepted into the formal wizarding community, but he found his own magic in loyalty, in friendship, in raising beings no one else dared to love. In that sense, he became more powerful than the ones who scorned him. It's easy to love a hero who has always been strong. It's far harder and more beautiful to love one who has been broken and still chose not to break others. That is Hagrid's story. That is why he matters. In every student he carries across the lake, in every creature he nurses back to life, and in every time he says, "You did good, Harry," we see the man who almost took the wrong path and didn't. Was Voldemort truly close to turning him? We may never know for sure. Rowling has never confirmed it. But the theory holds because it feels true. The darkness knocked on Hagrid's door, and he, clumsy and heartful, gently closed it and went back to feeding the hippogriffs. Perhaps that's the most heroic act of all. Number 26. Hagrid might have been a druid. The first time Hagrid appears in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he doesn't glide into the room with a swirl of a cloak or an incantation. He crashes through a door with the force of a storm and simply says, Sorry about that. No wand, no magic words, just presence. From the beginning, Hagrid feels different. He's not the kind of wizard who walks with a staff or flourishes a wand. He walks with the earth, drenched in rain, boots caked in mud. This physicality, this closeness to the ground and all things natural, is the first clue that perhaps Rubeus Hagrid isn't just an unconventional wizard. Perhaps he is something older, something forgotten, a druid. For centuries, druids were the spiritual keepers of nature, the guardians of forest and stone, far removed from the structured classrooms of Hogwarts. They held their rights beneath moonlit trees, not in stone towers, and drew their power not from Latin incantations but from rivers, birdsong, and the whisper of ancient groves. Hagrid fits into this idea more neatly than most wizards would care to admit. His magic does not look like Dumbledore's dazzling spells or McGonagall's sharp transfigurations. In fact, it rarely looks like magic at all, but it works, subtly, powerfully, and it is rooted not in technique, but in being. Look at his affinity with magical creatures. Where others fear or fail to understand beasts like hippogriffs, thestrals, or even dragons, Hagrid connects with them. He doesn't merely tame them, he speaks to them, knows them, reveres them. His relationship with Buckbeak is not one of ownership or dominance, but mutual respect. He's proud, Hagrid warns the third years before their first care of magical creatures lesson. You got to show him respect. This idea that magic lies in respect and harmony rather than control echoes Druidic philosophy to its core. Even the Forbidden Forest bends toward Hagrid, not away. While other professors hesitate to enter its shadows, Hagrid moves through it like he belongs. The centaurs, notoriously disdainful of human interference, tolerate him. He's not like the others, Firenze once said, not like the others. The forest doesn't seem forbidden to Hagrid at all, it's more like home. When he raises Norbert the Norwegian ridgeback dragon in his wooden hut, there's no formal spellcraft involved, just warmth, care, and a burning fire. He reads about dragon eggs, mimics their natural environment, and even hums lullabies. A wizard might summon a protective charm. Hagrid uses instinct. A druid, too, would draw magic from observation and closeness to nature rather than incantations. Another detail, Hagrid's wand is broken, technically at least. Snapped in half after his expulsion in third year, it's been hidden in the shaft of his pink umbrella ever since. Most assume Dumbledore helped him enchant it. But consider this. What if the broken wand doesn't matter as much as we think? What if Hagrid's magic doesn't depend on the wand at all? He rarely uses it. When he does, it's clumsy. He tries to turn Dudley into a pig and only gives him a pig's tail. Yet when he cares for unicorns, when he soothes Buckbeak, when he survives in the woods with dangerous beasts, there's no visible magic, and yet something deeper is clearly at work. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, during the class with Buckbeak, Malfoy is injured. Panic breaks out. Yet Hagrid's immediate concern isn't revenge or punishment, it's the beast's honor. He didn't do nothing wrong, he pleads. Druids believed animals had spirit and dignity, traits to be protected. Hagrid mirrors this belief, defending the creature not because it's his, but because it's innocent. There's also Hagrid's curious relationship with weather. Time and again, his arrival coincides with rain, wind, or shifting skies. In the Philosopher's Stone, he arrives on a stormy night. When he leaves to visit the giants in the Order of the Phoenix, ominous clouds brew. Coincidence? Maybe. But in folklore, druids were said to commune with the elements. They read the skies and called on storms. Hagrid doesn't control the weather, but it seems to follow him. Hagrid's name, too, is telling. Rubeus, Latin for red, the colour of life, blood, and earth. In ancient magical traditions, red symbolized primal power. A Druidic link, perhaps. Hagrid, similar to hag-ridden, an old term tied to night spirits and folklore. Even in name, he straddles the mystical and the mundane. He's also a half-giant. Giants, in wizarding history, are viewed as brutes, but in older mythologies they were earth spirits, gatekeepers of mountains, fire and frost. That lineage, combined with Hagrid's human gentleness, gives him a unique position, half wizard, half earth. A liminal figure, a druid in form if not in title. We know from the Goblet of Fire that Hagrid visits the giants on Dumbledore's orders, but what's more interesting is how easily he slips into their world. He doesn't flinch at their size or customs. He speaks their language, knows their ways, he brings them offerings. In a way, he acts more like an emissary of the old world than a modern representative of the Ministry of Magic. Diplomacy through connection, not bureaucracy. Another Druidic trait. Hagrid's hut itself is a kind of shrine to nature. Nestled at the edge of the forest, made of wood and stone, it houses creatures, herbs, and earthy objects. No paintings, no magical artifacts, just warmth, firelight, and life. It is unmistakably a sacred grove in miniature. In the Half-Blood Prince, during Aragog's funeral, Hagrid shows a depth of emotion that feels ancient, ritualistic. He was a good spider, he says solemnly, and a friend. It's not just mourning, it's reverence. Slughorn, who attends for self-serving reasons, contrasts sharply with Hagrid, who views Aragog's death as a sacred passing. That moment, with the moon shining and the forest whispering, could have come straight from a Druidic rite. Let us not forget his fear of spells. In the Chamber of Secrets, Hagrid says, "I was expelled. The wand was snapped in half, but Dumbledore let me stay on as gamekeeper. Great man, Dumbledore." There's pain in his voice, perhaps not just because he lost his wand, but because he was never meant to use one in the first place. Druidic magic didn't rely on wands, it relied on the self, on understanding the land. Hagrid's expulsion may have severed him from wizard society, but it might have returned him to his roots. When Grawp, his half-brother, is brought back from the mountains, Hagrid doesn't restrain him with spells. He teaches him, gently. "Grawpy, this is Hermione," he says. "Hermione, Grawpy." There's no fear, no pomp, just family. A druid would see the divine even in the giant, the monstrous the other. Even Hagrid's speech, coarse, filled with contractions and odd grammar, feels ancient. Not uneducated, as some might think, but oral, storytelling. His tales wind through pauses and exclamations like bards of old. "I shouldn't have said that," he mutters again and again. And yet he says what needs to be said, like a druid keeping lore alive, even by accident. In the Deathly Hallows, when the Battle of Hogwarts erupts, Hagrid doesn't stand at the front casting spells. He rides in with creatures, spiders, centaurs, giants. He brings the wild to Hogwarts' defense as if nature itself rises behind him. The magic in that moment isn't in the wands, it's in the roar of the forest, the stampede of hooves. It is old, raw, and powerful. There is one more telling moment. In the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid says of dragons, "I'd love a dragon." When he hatches Norbert, he's overjoyed. Wizards fear dragons. Hagrid dreams of them. Druids believe dragons were keepers of Earth's secrets. Their appearance signaled transformation. Hagrid doesn't seek to control that power. He yearns simply to witness it. And finally, consider Dumbledore's unwavering faith in Hagrid, the greatest wizard of the age, placing his trust in a half-giant with a broken wand. "I would trust Hagrid with my life," Dumbledore says. He doesn't say this lightly. He sees what others do not just loyalty, but depth, a different kind of magic. Perhaps that's the heart of it. Hagrid's magic is not seen but felt. It lies in the silence between words, the rustle of leaves, the breath of a beast. He is not the wizard the Ministry recognizes, but in the rustling forest, in the call of creatures, and in the hush before the storm, Hagrid speaks a language older than Hogwarts itself. He may never wear a robe of office or carry a golden staff, but his power is undeniable. He may not call himself a druid, but the forest already has. Number 27, Hagrid, died in an alternate ending. There is a shadow that lingers over the pages of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, one that many readers feel even if they can't always explain it. It's a heaviness that settles during certain scenes, especially when Hagrid carries Harry's seemingly lifeless body from the Forbidden Forest. Some say it's just the weight of war, but others believe it's something more. A ghost of a different ending, one the world never saw. According to a long-circulated theory among dedicated fans, J.K. Rowling originally intended for Rubeus Hagrid to die in the final book. She changed her mind later, but the echoes of that lost ending still remain, woven deeply into the story's most emotional moments. It's not just fan speculation pulled from thin air. Rowling herself admitted in several interviews that she had created a death list early in the planning stages of the final book. I had a bit of a shake-up where I changed who was going to die and who was going to survive, she told The Today Show in 2007. While she never confirmed Hagrid was one of those originally doomed characters, the absence of any definitive denial and the intensity of his scenes gave fuel to the theory's fire. To understand why Hagrid's death would have made sense narratively, one only needs to look at the structure of the series. Hagrid was the first magical person Harry ever met. He was the one who shattered the lie of the Dursleys' world and told Harry, "You're a wizard, Harry." His presence bookended the story in powerful ways. He delivered Harry to the Dursleys in Philosopher's Stone, and in Deathly Hallows he carried Harry's body back to Hogwarts. It would have been tragically poetic if Hagrid, like a guardian of fate, had died fulfilling the same role he had in Harry's beginning, this time escorting him in death. That final scene, Hagrid carrying Harry, is not only powerful, but haunting. Screamed Voldemort. "He's dead!" he declared, pointing at the boy in Hagrid's arms. But Hagrid, sobbing, refused to speak. "Harry!" "Oh, Harry," he muttered, staggering under the weight of the boy he'd loved like a son. It wasn't just grief. It felt like a farewell, like the last words of a man whose heart was already breaking, because he knew this was his end too. Hagrid, who had always been strong, resilient, and full of warmth, looked broken in that moment. In fact, the imagery of that scene closely mirrors Michelangelo's Pietà, the Renaissance sculpture where the Virgin Mary cradles the dead Christ. That artistic connection isn't accidental. Rowling studied classics and literature and often used symbolism to layer meaning into her writing. Hagrid carrying Harry is one of the most sacred visual moments in the series. But what if it was meant to be even more final? What if Hagrid had fallen in the forest too, perhaps dying trying to protect Harry, and the last act of love was mirrored between them? There's a poignant theory that Hagrid was supposed to shield Harry during the march to Voldemort. Taking the first blow meant for him, perhaps thinking it would save him. It's easy to imagine him roaring in defiance, stepping in front of Harry with a defiant, "Not my boy," but Voldemort, ever cruel, kills them both. That would have made Harry's survival all the more miraculous, and Hagrid's death would have been the final push, emotionally and symbolically, toward Voldemort's defeat. Many readers point to how emotionally raw the scenes with Hagrid are in Deathly Hallows. He disappears for large stretches of the book, only to return in two key moments. When he is captured and held in the Forbidden Forest, and when he carries Harry. The first moment is almost glossed over, mentioned by Death Eaters who say he's been taken. The second, however, is described in great detail. Why devote so much emotional energy and literary real estate to a character that doesn't even fight in the Battle of Hogwarts? Unless his original arc was different, much darker. One of the most overlooked clues lies in the Forbidden Forest. After Voldemort kills Harry, Hagrid is forced to carry him back, not just as a friend, but as a trophy of war. Rowling paints the scene with unbearable heaviness. Harry could feel the movements of Hagrid's arms and legs, shaking with emotion, trembling with the weight of sorrow. Why is it Hagrid who carries him? Why not a Death Eater? Why not someone more intimidating? It's as if the story needed this particular visual audience, and the answer might be that Rowling originally planned for Hagrid to die here and only later rewrote the scene to let him live. Fans have scoured early drafts and interviews for signs. While no manuscript confirming Hagrid's death has surfaced, several insiders hinted that major characters were swapped in and out of the death list. It is widely known that Arthur Weasley was supposed to die but survived, while others, like Lupin and Tonks, were later chosen to increase the emotional weight. Hagrid's survival may have come from a similar switch, one perhaps made late in the writing process when Rowling realized the emotional toll would be too much. And yet the shadow remains. Robbie Coltrane, who portrayed Hagrid in the films, seemed to carry that sorrow with him, especially in the final scenes. "There's something deeply noble about Hagrid," he once said in an interview. "He's one of the few characters who never stops believing in Harry." If Hagrid had died, it would have shattered Harry and the readers more than almost any other death. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that was the original heartbreak Rowling wrote and then chose to undo. In the film adaptation of Deathly Hallows Part 2, the scene where Hagrid carries Harry was given special cinematic focus. The camera lingers on Hagrid's tear-streaked face. He stumbles, breathes hard, looks like a man who's already halfway gone. He doesn't fight, he doesn't argue, he doesn't speak much. That silence, many believe, is telling. It's the ghost of a storyline that was meant to kill him. Interestingly, in earlier versions of the screenplay, there were rumors that Hagrid's death was indeed included and cut late in production. A leak from a studio source in 2010 suggested there were alternate scenes filmed, or at least storyboarded, involving Hagrid's death. Though these have never been confirmed or released, the idea continues to fuel the theory among hardcore fans. But perhaps the greatest piece of evidence isn't textual, it's emotional. Deathly Hallows is full of goodbyes. Hedwig, Dobby, Fred, Lupin, Tonks, Snape. The losses are staggering, but Hagrid's survival feels like a thread of hope pulled from a tapestry of grief, as if Rowling at the last moment couldn't bring herself to take him from us, as if she knew that some losses are too deep, too final, too cruel.